Do you like basketball? Basketball, I like, but I'm not good at. Yes, I'm not.
Me too.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the State of the League podcast Wednesday edition, the only NBA podcast breaking down, the Dejounte Murray trade like 4 months after it happened. We're really getting in at the peak of all this stuff. I'm your host, Jack, aka Jokic Showstar. With me, as always, the world famous Pablo Escobar, and we are delighted to be joined today by, just general internet smart guy DLEE4THREE, aka David. I'll throw it to you, David. How are you doing today?
Oh, for sure. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm doing pretty good. The Hawks got a little juicy matchup with the Knicks at about 7 p.m. Really looking forward to it. And again, talking to just some Hawks with y'all.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen you do post-game interviews with the Hawks. You're in the Hawks media room sometimes. So what officially is your position with, or around the organization?
Yeah, so I'm a part of a newspaper called The Afro. It's one of the oldest black businesses in the country. They're stationed in Maryland, but one of the biggest readership bases is actually in Atlanta. And so I was blessed to have the opportunity to represent them at the Hawks game. So I'll take pictures, post a little bit on the social media. But for the most part, it's been a good way for me to keep building my platform and have some more visibility in the media space. But that's essentially what I do. And then so, I cover under their sort of umbrella.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty sick. The closest I've DM'd one NBA player before, and then I don't know what that's realer interactions than we have ever had. And so not only is it cool that you get to do that, it's cool that you are so professional when you do it. I would be shaking in my boots if I had to. I'd be like, Trey, what makes your floater different than everyone else's? So yeah.
Do you remember the guy who did that with Westbrook? He was asking him a question. He's like, "Never mind, I'm nervous," and then he stopped.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
That's insane. Okay, yeah, so we're just breaking down. I don't know. Obviously, the Hawks coming off a difficult Nuggets game. It was a bit one-sided affair, but before that, they were really rolling. And I do feel in terms of turning a corner on the season, the vibes have been different over the past few weeks. So I just want to do a general check-in with all of that because looking at last year versus this year, I feel like the Hawks are one of the teams that have changed the most, and it's just generally the outlook on the franchise is the most different as well. So, Pablo, I feel like you have not talked a lot yet. How do you feel about the Hawks right now as an outside perspective?
Yeah, so I've been a Trey Young fanboy for many years, and there are some things different about this Hawks team. For example, I think over the past 10 games, they're up to 14th in defense. That's the highest I can remember it being in the entirety of Trey Young's tenure. So what's going on with the Hawks right now? Are they a defensive team? What's the composition?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because this team is actually a lot worse on offense than I would have expected as well. Some of that, of course, is Trey's struggles as a shooter. Clint Capella and Onyeka haven't been as dynamic as rollers. And then just in general, when you look at our starting lineup, Dyson Daniels, Clint Capella, Zachary Rizache, who's one of the worst high volume 3-point shooters to start the season, it's been a little bit tough to get the offense flowing. But what's been really remarkable is that they've been able to lean on defense, which is, like you said, Pablo, completely unheard of in the Trey Young era. And that's not to say that at times they weren't a tenable defense with Trey on the floor, but they're winning games from the defensive end. When they played Cleveland, they held Cleveland to their lowest offensive rating of the season at that point. And that's ridiculous, right? And a lot of it is some schematically. So they've committed to tagging rollers a lot heavier. So they're completely cutting off any sort of dump offs or short rolls. And then they're trusting Dyson Daniels in space. And when you have one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA, that helps and opens up so much more defensively for everyone else. And so as they've gotten more reps, they've gotten a little bit crisper. They're trusting him more. They're not peeling off as aggressively. And then you just have a lot of length, a lot of versatility. Jalen Johnson in the passing lanes, Rizache. I think Rizache and Dyson Daniels combined for 8 or 9 deflections a game.
Yeah.
And he's finding his footing as a defender as well. So a lot of personnel changes, but I think schematically, they finally found a sound sort of balance between the sort of different extremes they've had to play over the last couple of years, where they had to blitz a lot to cover up, the lack of point of attack defense. Shout out to Dejounte. And then they were playing heavy drop for that same sort of reason. So now they have a healthy balance.
Oh, shout out Dejounte, man. Just, it was time to move on. That's tough. And we'll get to all that in a second. But yeah, I think the defense, it's really like what stands out the most is just how the defense has led to statement wins so far this season. Because you look at, I think the Hawks were 10-15 at this point last year. Like, they were well below 500, and I feel like that was a start that was pretty reflective of their entire season, because I know, like, Trey missed a lot of time, there was some health stuff, but generally speaking, they were a team that, like, could take care of business against the bottom feeders of the NBA, but wasn't a real serious postseason threat and really struggled to like be competitive against the best teams in the NBA consistently. Whereas right now,
Right.
I feel like they already have like 4 statement wins on the season, which is weird when you look at like their record's only 13-12 or whatever, one game above 500, but they beat the Celtics without Trey Young, obviously. They've beat the Cavs twice, once with their offense, once with their defense, and then they just put a stop to Milwaukee's 6 or 7 game win streak, largely with their defense as well. They held Milwaukee to like it was like 104 points, I think. And
Right.
so yeah, it's just when we talk about like the vibe shifting and the way that they're winning games, it's super cool to see. Okay, Trey Young isn't like this overwhelming offensive force, at least as a scorer that we've seen him be in the past. And they're still able to be successful as a team because of it, because they've surrounded him with guys who can finish the plays that he creates, and they've really allowed him to flourish as a playmaker, like leading the league in assists and everything. So, yeah, I think, I don't know, my big question just to start off was, like, what separates this year's Hawks team from last year's and from like past iterations that were competent basketball teams? What makes it feel different? We got into the defense a little bit. Is there anything else that sticks out to you in that regard?
Yeah, for sure. And also, you mentioned the record, like 13-12 isn't super impressive considering we did come off a 6-game win streak. But we also gave Washington their first 2 wins of the season before you guys gave them a win as well.
Yeah,
So it's like
tough.
it's still a very variable team. That's what happens when you have young guys. We have some pretty bad losses to Portland, Detroit down the stretch too. So like there's a couple there that the Hawks should have been more comfortably above 500. But you mentioned like, is there anything else outside of the defense? So I like to do like a quarterly report and just tracking the way that Quinn Snyder's impacting this team. And so we've seen like a sharp increase in the effectiveness scoring off of handoffs. Last year they were 24th. This year they're 10th. Their percentage of plays in the half court, which means they're getting out and running, which makes sense. You have Jalen Johnson, you have Dyson Daniels, you have Zachary Reese. These are really great open court athletes, and they didn't run nearly enough last year. So they went from the 19th lowest percentage of plays in the half court to now the 26th. So they're in the top 5 in the percentage of the plays in the half court. They're isoing at the lowest rate in the league. Last year, Dejounte was actually a really great isolation scorer.
Mm-hmm.
So you was going to see a dip there, but they're sort of replacing those possessions with a better and more improved overall shot profile. So they have the highest shot quality in the league. They attack the rim at this, I think, the 3rd highest rate. They have the 1st highest paint field goal attempt rate. And then they're also getting out in transition at a top 5 rate. And so they're replacing a lot of those tougher shots in the half court that they're not going to be able to rely on without Dejounte by getting out and running and sort of creating extra looks. And they're also a great offensive rebounding team. So their kind of whole offensive philosophy has changed. They're also first in pace. And I think they're top 10 in the percentage of possessions and bonus. So like last year, there was a lack of rim pressure on this team. Dejounte is not he can get to the rim, but he's also not great at selling contact. Like that,
Yeah.
That's also a skill as well. And he would sometimes go around the contact instead of embracing it. So the Hawks were they were 26th in the percentage of their possessions in the bonus. And this year they're top 10. It's about a 5% increase. And here's the value of being in the bonus. It's like a +2 to your offensive rating from some of the research I've looked at. So like teams like Denver, where they have strong interior presences, or even like for a Hawks team that has these athletes that can get above the rim, that's so valuable because, again, they don't have the half-court creation. And then this has all resulted, again, in that first overall shot quality, but they're now 4th in potential assists per game. So the ball's popping, Trey's trusting guys to move it up the floor without him having to bring it up. And I think like the biggest sort of theme of this season has just been trust in Quinn Snyder and playing the young guys, trust from Trey Young and Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson, and they're making quick decisions. They're putting increased emphasis on movement and getting out in transition. And last year they were so awful in the clutch. Like I think we had the 21st ranked offense and we had the 19th clutch record. Like it was disgusting basketball. Like everyone was talking about my turn, your turn. That's what it was. This year, at the time that I pulled this, we had the fourth best clutch record, third highest net rating, and fifth offense. So this is the sort of testament to what like movement and trust can do. And then as these guys get a little bit more comfortable, Reza Shea finds his footing. Jalen Johnson continues to grow as a half-court scorer because he's not really there yet.
Yeah.
And I think the Hawks have a system going forward, which I also think you're seeing a team like Memphis is doing something similar. Like when I look at Memphis's numbers, they're doing somewhat of a similar strategy. So there's definitely something to keep tracking throughout the season.
Pablo, what do you think about that?
Another interesting thing I've noticed is Trey is playing off ball more than he ever has in his career. It's ticked up little by little, and he's even doing things like setting screens for other guys. How has his growth been on that part of the game?
Yeah, it's good to hear like some positive PR about Trey. It's interesting because I feel like at this point, I think Hawks fans are more critical of him than the national media or just like the not casual fan, but a non-Hawks fan. Like I think we're sort of fixating on his lack of burst or scoring aggression. But he's playing his best holistic basketball in terms of like competition defensively, his placement and positioning. And like you mentioned, the screening, like they've gone to inverted pick and roll multiple times in the clutch. There's still kinks there because like he'll set that and then they'll get the switch and then the Hawks will pass it to someone else. It's like, the point of doing the inverted pick and roll is to at least, put pressure on the defense from that switch. If you just sort of passively pass out of it, then it's like, okay, what do we do that for? So again, like I think a lot of great growth in that aspect is great that you're noticing that. I think he's been absolutely willing to do that. And it helps him a lot too, because with the Achilles thing, also with the fouling changes where, he can't put guys in jail as easy as he used to, getting downhill off a handoff or off the catch is going to be so much more it's going to get him to the paint a lot easier. So
yeah,
it's been a big change and a certainly a welcome change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like people continually want Trey. Like there's so many criticisms about like Trey Young dominates the ball. Trey Young he can only succeed in this very specific kind of way, and then you see him make all these changes this season, and I agree with you that he's playing his best holistic basketball, and I think everybody here probably agrees that the shot will come around to some degree.
Right.
Like he's not going to be that level of a scorer the entire season, but you see him in the eye test doing all of this stuff, like trying really hard defensively and doing just like a lot of like gritty, hard-nosed stuff that you don't necessarily associate with Trey Young. And
right.
I feel like the public opinion on him, maybe, I don't know if it's never been lower. I feel like it's never been more polarized, where there's groups like us where we're like, damn, like this is really, really high level basketball. And there's other groups where it's like they just look at the efficiency and how he's struggled on those fronts. And it's been like, okay, well, now that he's not doing this, like he's out of all of these different conversations. And I don't know. I've never been like I don't give a shit if somebody ranks a player where I want them to be ranked or likes a different player.
Right.
But it is just frustrating, even as someone like outside who's not like, I don't know, emotionally invested in the team as a fan, to see people kind of clamor for these stylistic changes in his basketball. And then when those changes come around and you see as a result, there's like statistical changes in the way that he affects the game. I don't know. People don't value it the same way that they should. And so it's just it's low on like the list of worries, but it is just something that like frustrates me when I look around at like how people talk about the Hawks.
Yeah, and I know Pablo has, you've expressed your appreciation for Trey's game. Now, if you followed me on TikTok for a little bit, right, you may have seen my first interaction with Jack about Trey. This was a couple months ago. I was throwing shots at Halliburton. And Jack,
hey, you're up.
So I threw shots at Halliburton, and look, people call me Halliburton hater. I'm not a hater. I'm a realist, and so like I'm taking my laps now because there's a lot of inconsistency, and that's not I have a whole theory about him we can maybe get into later, but essentially what it came down to, Jack was saying that This is the second most efficient game of Trey's career, and then we have like a whole volume versus efficiency
Yeah,
talk.
yeah.
So I would love to hear like what's been sort of turning the page on Trey Young for you. Is it more so like just like what's changed? I guess.
I don't know. I just kind of like locked into him, and to be honest, I was like the Halliburton 3 months. I still cling to it. It's so much fun to like look
It was
back on
incredible.
and
No,
everything.
it was definitely incredible.
But like, I do think I've just come around on the fact that like I like the variety of creation or the variety of advantages that Trey is able to create, because I think he's better, not just like better as a passer, but I think there's like so many of Halliburton's assists are just like we're getting to the free throw line and he is creating an advantage. He is making something happen. There's an open shot that he's finding or whatever. But I just think that like Trey is better at a lot of that stuff while being like, if you're not going to be like 75% true shooting, insane volume 3-point shooter, usually I'm going to prefer like the 25, 26 point per game guy on like solid efficiency to like low volume scoring with like crazy efficiency. And so once Halliburton came back down to earth on that front, and then especially since like all of the health stuff, like it's not even a conversation anymore. Well, I mean, I don't know how people are going to feel about like that, but I definitely feel like Trey is super up right now. So I guess in the moment, probably overwhelmed by how well Halliburton was playing and was underrating just what Trey is as like a passer. And I definitely feel like since we had that conversation and since I've started to watch him more, I have woken up to the fact that like he's like one of the best passers in the history of basketball. Like he does so much on so many
Better than Stockton.
Oh my God. Like there's just like outside of like the height limitations, there's like very, very, very few passes that Trey can't make. And so I don't know. I guess I was casual and I locked in because you woke me up, man.
I mean, look, welcome to the right side of history. I think people will look back at Trey and sort of, I still cannot believe the Ringer called him divisive, petulant, and controversial. Like those three words.
That was nuts. That was so nuts.
That was ridiculous for the type of player and person he is. Right?
Yeah.
And what I will say, he's absolutely polarizing. Like I think that's the type of word that people use, and it's less about. Yes, it can be about him as a player, like some of the shot selection that people don't necessarily vibe with. There are times where I'm like, Trey, did you have to shoot that 35-footer with 23 seconds on the shot clock? Maybe not. But here's the thing, though. I can then look and see, okay, now he's got AD on the switch. When he goes into this pump fake, AD is closing out, and he's 30 feet away from the basket. Now the rim protector is all the way from like 30 feet away. Now he can dump the Capella, and it's a layup. So, like, there's always value even in the threat of his shot. And so I think once I started to view it through that lens, then I was okay with it. And the other really interesting thing that he's been doing this year, he's taking more of those deep threes in transition. And that helps the Hawks because a lot of times if he takes those in a half-court setting, he's the first guy back. So if it's a long rebound, it's an automatic 2 points, of course, because of the height limitations. But in transition, the defense isn't set. The Hawks have offensive rebound opportunities. So there's like little things like that, those micro adjustments that are helping him become a more impactful player. But I'm also just curious, like, where do you guys sit on like a small guard heliocentrism in general? Because he's not going to be the last of his kind. And I think it's absolutely fair to be like, okay, is this someone you can really build a championship around? Mm-hmm. Because we've only seen really, I would say 2 players, and that's Isaiah Thomas. That was a different era with a bunch of, goons around him who are going to kill everyone who tried to touch him. And then you have Steph Curry, who of course completely changed the gravity of the game and the rules of the game. So outside of those two, we have never seen it work. So where do you guys stand on like that sort of like small guard as your lead scorer and lead initiator?
Pablo, you've talked about this with like the building around Wemby part of it all. And so I'll let you take the lead here.
So Trey Young, I've been a stan the whole time. Like as we've talked about, there's been so much Trey Young derangement. Like in year 2, he's averaging 28 and 10 efficiently with Alex Len as his sidekick or whatever. And everyone's like, I hate this guy. I can't believe he's taking all these shots, whatever. And I'm like, this is one of the most impressive sophomore seasons ever. This is the same thing offensively Luka's doing. And so the whole time I've been so all in. But as people have been like, no, he's just too bad defensively to ever win. And I was like, well, no, he's too good offensively. But I do have to admit, as his career's gone on, post the conference finals playoff run, I am a little more nervous about his viability offensively in the playoffs, because if you are as tiny as he is defensively, you have to be game changing offensively in the playoffs. And he was struggling a lot versus obviously the Miami series and even the Boston series where he did better. It's still not to the level of like a superstar small point guard that could take you all the way. And so I was like, man, and so one of the great hope was the off ball would come along more and he would become just like fully embraced, because breaking three defenders off the dribble, like having all of Miami's defense lock into you and you breaking down all those guys off the dribble to get to the rim, not really realistic to live off that in the playoffs. And then his shot just always goes up and down. He's like a streaky 3-point shooter. So I wanted the off ball thing to come around for him to ever be fully viable in the playoffs. And I've always kind of ignored the defense, but as we've gotten in the current NBA right now, all the contending teams are like, it's very little weaknesses. Like the Celtics have almost no weakness on both end. OKC almost no weaknesses. And then the next teams down, it's like only the small point guard is their weakness, like Brunson or like John Morant. And so one of the questions I've been wondering, and I was going to ask you this today, is it seems teams are now there's a dynamic that I'm wondering which is more damaging, a guy who can be targeted on defense or a guy who can be ignored on offense. So where do you, because I'm still making up my mind on that. And like what he mentioned about me with Wemby is in the draft I was like, I don't necessarily want them to, or even with Trey, there were Trey trade rumors. I was like, I don't necessarily want that to be the pairing, or I don't want Rob Dillingham, just because if you have Wemby, you have a chance to form like an unstoppable defense. And I think that could outweigh the Trey Young half court lobs to Wemby or whatever, even though it would be incredible. And so I've become more pessimistic about the small guards on defense. But where do you come down on targeted on defense versus ignored on offense?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think at a certain level, defense can only matter so much, especially like when you get to you're going against a high level shot maker. Like the quality of contests really doesn't matter against guys like KD or Wembanyama when they get to their apex or their jump shot. But it can absolutely compromise the entire defensive infrastructure, and that's why you need, for example, Cleveland is playing great defense right now. Darius Garland is competing. He competed against in that Celtics game. He competed. He forced Tatum into several tough misses, and that's a severe mismatch for them. But they can live with that because he's being scrappy. And I think Trey has to put on weight. I think that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for him to put on a weight, that he needs to have someone who can create with burst and speed in the half court. If that does end up being a detriment for him, like Darius Garland, I think is maybe 20 or 15 pounds heavier than him, and that matters.
That's crazy, especially like coming off the jaw thing last year. That's insane.
Mm. Like I know he lost a lot of weight, so maybe he's not where he used to be. But I'm pretty sure he was 190. Trey is 165, 170 ish, maybe 175.
Wow.
I think that's where he's playing at, and so he's had to bulk up over the years. Like even you see a little bit more definition year to year. Kind of like it is kind of like that toothpick thing where like he steps back. It's really the same dude, but that sort of like growth as in his musculature matters because he has to be able to withstand the sort of he takes a lot of punishment. Like he gets matched up against 6 wings that are 220 pounds. Like you have to have a frame that can withstand that. And so I think that ultimately, I think you can circumvent like offensive inefficiencies a little bit easier than defensive inefficiencies. Like for example, Alex Caruso can flow into a dribble handoff. Alex Caruso also just like there aren't like these massive limitations, these massively limited 3-point shooters anymore that are going to be playing rotation minutes in the playoffs. Like Alex Caruso shot it really well in Chicago on low volume. They're going to force him to knock down those threes for OKC in the playoffs this year. But I feel a lot more comfortable about him doing that than like Andre Roberson. And I also feel like when you're that level defender, you can make up for that, like the 0.5 or 1 point in offensive rating that you're losing because he's that game breaking. Same thing with Dyson Daniels. So ultimately, I do think the offensive inefficiencies are a little bit tougher for a team to cover up. And it's also like, how much does that complicate the defense's like integrity in general. Because once a team gets you in rotation and you're over helping, that's when you really start losing badly. And that's what Boston does to teams, because they can mismatch Hunt so effectively with their roster. And I think I absolutely agree. Like the NBA is going in a direction where like versatility and like positional versatility is like the MO. And that's what you're seeing with every contender right now. Houston is on that path as well. Jalen Green will probably be out of there soon, at least in my opinion.
Yeah,
Like
agreed.
he's kind of like the dynasty is after you, unfortunately. But it's like, you got Amin, you got Tari, you got Jabari Jr. And like you said, you can't have both Jalen Green or Reed Shepard or Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. Like at the most, you have to have one defensive line, and you have to be incredible offensively. So I think he can lean more into the playmaking like he is this year, and we have someone develop as that wing scorer to take the pressure off of him. But I don't think that he's it's really a good idea to even have him as like the primary offensive creator. But even in the playoffs last year, or in their 2021 run, where he had like a larger sample size, in isolation, he was scoring like just relatively a little bit below league average, like just minus 0.02. He was on the 90th percentile in possessions per game. And of course, he runs pick and rolls more than anyone. He ran 17 per game in the playoffs and was scoring above like the league average during that time frame. So he's had sustained periods of success scoring the ball in the playoffs. But as the rules have changed, as teams have been able to collapse on him a little bit more defensively, it's sort of exacerbated those flaws that he has, just like just due to his frame. And like I was watching I can't remember what guard I was watching, but I was thinking about Brunson, and like when Brunson comes off the screen, he's a lot wider.
Yeah.
He's about the same height as Trey, but he can put guys in the jail. He can put his body on someone and bang, and that's just a more sustainable way to generate offense throughout the playoffs. If you're constantly trying to run off of screens and catch guys with fouls, or like you're just trying to finish below the rim and you can't get to that in between game without creating space from the pick and roll, it can be tougher, and teams can scheme against it. So yeah, it's his limitations as a scorer do somewhat concern me, but I think they're looking at the wings around him to circumvent that, and then that's how you build a contender around him.
Yeah. Can you guys hear this fire truck right now?
No.
Okay, beautiful. There's no fire truck. I made it up. Yeah. So what I was gonna say is that like I feel like most of the time we see like most NBA champions, as far as like building teams go, kind of just like they happen upon a very unique advantage that lets them kind of like build a team in a way that a lot of other like NBA teams aren't able to, whether that's like they have an incredible young player on a really good contract and they can flesh out the roster around them really well, or like the Warriors when they were able to add KD because everybody, like, they were on the Steph ankle contract and the TV deal went up, so like everything just lined up.
And Iguodala was a traitor.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, don't get me started. But so what I like about the Hawks right now, and what I love about the Dejounte Murray move, is that at the bare minimum, it extends the window to a point where you're like, hey, Boston could fall apart and we would still be competitive. Like it changes things so it feels like they are ascending again, and that's just like obviously that's a much more comfortable spot to be in. It's more comfortable to do that than to be like Minnesota last year being like, hey, these are the runs right now. And so yeah, it makes it more comfortable to be like, maybe in like the new window, maybe that unique set of circumstances comes along that allows them to build a roster that really supplements Trey Young's weaknesses and allows him to be like a dominant postseason player and everything. So I don't know. The next thing I wrote down is just after why are the vibes different. I broke down the Dejounte Murray trade a little bit, which I'm sure you personally have already talked about a ton, and we don't need to like get into a ton here. It's just crazy to essentially in one off season through like the number one pick in the draft and the Dejounte Murray trade, and how the absence of Murray kind of allows Jalen Johnson to become who he's been this season. In one off season, you go from like, I don't know what this team is, to now not just a younger team, but like a team that makes a lot of sense, like just athletic, long guys around Trey Young. And so obviously I feel like that being that long and being that athletic and having all of these switchable young guys contributes to the level of defense that they've played so far this season. I don't know. I'm just curious, like, how you're feeling on that front. How if you want to take Dejounte trade victory laps here, if you want to just gas up Dyson Daniels, I'll give you the platform for whatever you want to do. It's just like Hawks fans, how does it feel?
First team
Man,
all defense.
I think he's absolutely should be in play for that. I also feel like I've been victory lapping the DeJounte trade since the moment it was done. Like it is hilarious that we got 2 first-round picks, not to mention the Lakers first, which could be a lottery pick, depending on how they look. I think they've been shakier than their record suggests.
Agreed.
But I just think like it is honestly crazy the return we got. Larry Nance is probably also worth it first, and he's also a great locker room guy. Like all the guys love him. When I went to media day, Larry Nance came and sat behind. He sat with us. It was just chopping it up.
Oh, cool.
Super nice guy. Like he's super cool. And so I've even seen videos of him like breaking down the huddles for the Hawks. So I think he's been in a lot of ways like just a great presence. And so it's just been completely additive. And I like my whole pitch, as soon as we made that trade, I was like, at the minimum, this is addition by subtraction. Like that's really what it was. Like I have wanted Dyson Daniels for years. Like I have tweets going back to 2022. Like he's such a special guy.
That's crazy. I mean, that's ball. Like you saw
that's
it
exactly
coming.
what we needed. Well, I was like, I don't know if he would ever be available, but New Orleans had so many wings. They were hoarding stuff. They had Najee. See what Najee's doing for Dallas right now.
Yeah.
Of course, you have Herb and Trey Murphy. They just had too many guys at that position. Someone had to go. The fact that it's Dyson, who I still think has a lot of untapped juice, is really interesting for the Hawks going forward. And I feel a lot more clarity about just in general the direction of the franchise. And it's refreshing again because it's like, if I'm going to be honest, Boston kind of owns the East for the next 2 years, if not longer, because they're all on long-term contracts. Now, you'll have to see how they continue to navigate around the second apron if they keep getting handouts from bad teams like Washington did. But at the end of the day, they have the infrastructure to be like a superpower. And so the Hawks have to build sustainably. There's not a move that's going to take them with DeJounte, even with the DeJounte return. People got Brandon Ingram. I love Brandon Ingram. I would have been, happy with the style of basketball because I just love him as a player. But that would have been a lateral move just because of the way it's set up right now. And so they're building with the future in mind. I think the next step is to find that center. I'm looking at Malawak right now and Rocco Zakarsky. And I also really like the Big Z's twin, Tommy, I think, who's playing for I forget the other team. I forget the team he plays for, but I watched him when they went head to head, and I really like the way he's looked. So I'm looking at bigs in this draft personally.
Yeah.
Going forward.
I don't know, Pablo. You wanna talk? You're the prospect guy, so if you want to comment on any of that, you can go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I haven't watched too much. Who did I watch? Oh, I watched Igor the other day, but that's it. I haven't gotten too far into it. But yeah, I have been watching the Hawks center, and so that's kind of the thing with this team is like we trust Trey Young. We know Trey Young is awesome. We know they have, at the very minimum, 3 really good wings because DeAndre Hunter seems to be back this year for whatever reason. They have Hunter, they have Johnson, they have Daniels, and then Rizichet, like you said, can already do some interesting things on defense. The one thing that's in question is the center. Like that would be the big thing that's holding them back. And so it seems Capella last year he looked really washed. This year it seems he might be a little less washed. He's not shooting as bad at the rim. But he's starting games. But Okongwu's finishing games, right? And I've been watching a lot of Okongwu to see what's going on. It's interesting because there's a lot of good there, but I don't know if he's fully able to flex his muscles. Like he doesn't do a whole lot, it seems, except for roll and except for handoffs. And part of the allure with him was like the passing stuff, and like you think about him on the short roll, but that seems to be taken up by Jalen Johnson, who's probably better at it. And then defensively, like the number one skill is probably the viability on the perimeter. Like he's a really good switch defender, but he doesn't do that a ton. And so what's the balance of these two guys? And Capella, it seems, starts just on virtue of his size because it's kind of like necessary. What's the balance with these guys? Who's better right now? And are either of these guys going to be on the roster going forward if they are winning in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think this is like the most divisive topic among Hawks fans because the thing about Clint Capella, like I think that's Trey Young's best friend. If I'm gonna be honest, like I think if he wasn't, I think they're really close. And I think if they weren't close, Clint would have been traded.
Yeah.
Um, so at least that's my personal opinion. Clint was like legitimately losing us games last year. He was awful, awful at the rim. He would catch offensive rebounds, throw up ill-advised hooks. He would never kick it out. It was one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced as a fan, and it's because I know how special he was when we traded for him. That year, 2021, he was a top 10 center easily. Now, like I struggle to say like on a consistent basis if he's top 20, but he's been really good this year. Um, Still, he doesn't look different like athletically, but I do think he's just a lot more focused around the rim. I watch him like during warm up sometimes, and he's taking mid range jumpers, and I'm like, bro, like what's like why? Like you will never shoot this in your life.
Yeah.
And he's taking mid range jumpers, he's throwing hooks up and smoking them, and I'm like, okay, we're in store for one of those games. But he's been pretty good, and so I think like, and it is not good that I think it's Onyeka's fifth season, or maybe it's his sixth.
It's been a minute,
It's not good.
regardless. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It is not good that Clint Capella is a better center than him at this point in his career, and that's what he is. He's a better screener. He's a better rebounder. He's a better rim protector. But sometimes, like Onyeka, I think is when he switches on the perimeter, I think his rim protection numbers aren't as good because he does have that versatility, similar to what like you would see with Bam. Ultimately, I do think I don't really feel like either of them are going to be the long-term solution, and I think we need a real big. Ideally, like I would love to have had like a demigod big. Like I was a big proponent for Sarr, and that's because I felt like as rough as he is offensively, I know he can be special defensively, and he has been like for the most part for Washington. But he still isn't like he was never a big. He was always a four in a fives role. He doesn't set screens hard. He doesn't finish well at the rim. He wants to shoot threes. He thinks he's Kevin Durant, and so it's like that's not a guy that we can afford to like mold because it's going to take him forever to get out that mindset.
Yeah,
It's like, okay,
yeah.
I'm going to hesitate between, get on the block, so run this screen and roll, screen hard. So you have to look. It's not just about size. It's about like, is this guy a big man? And that's why I like Maluwak, because it's like Maluwak is a big man, and he's still so new to basketball. But like he sets things hard. He competes on the glass. He has some passing pop, and then he also has he's showed the three a little bit. It's not there in a realized form yet. And for Onyeka, I think he brings a lot of versatility, and that's why he's closed games because you can switch him. He had big moments. I can't remember the game. I had it in my notes. He's had big moments like switch. Oh, it was actually the season opener against Brooklyn. Cam Thomas was on fire. I think he had 18 in the fourth, and Onyeka switched on him, took the ball away from him. And so like that's in if Clint was in that situation, I'm scared. But I'm comfortable with Onyeka because he can move. He's great with his hands. And so the Hawks have been blessed with like decent to good center play for 48 minutes for the last couple of years. But Onyeka has to be better than good because, again, with Trey and him on the floor, they're giving up size. And so the hope is, okay, you have enough positional size at these other places to make up for it. But I think eventually we're going to need that 7-footer, which is why I think Capella could be maybe gone after this year. Also because he's getting a little older and he's not going to fit the timeline of the team. But I'm really like, even like Maluwak, Zakarski, the other Visage twin that I mentioned, and then the guy at Georgetown, he's pretty good. And then even the Danny Wolf at Michigan, he's intriguing me too. Like I think the Hawks need someone with offensive. I mean, obviously you want to blend the defensive skills as much as you can, but like they need some offensive pop from the center position because Dyson and Reza Shea are not polished offensive players, and you don't want to bet on that eventually coming.
Yeah.
Because again, like it is the third year for Dyson, and Reza Shea, I think he can get there, but I don't think he'll ever be like. I think his high-end outcome is like Walmart Danny Granger in terms of like shot creation. Like he's not going to be someone you're going to give the ball to and like create the shot consistently. So you need a offensively viable center, and that's why it's tough for the Hawks because you got to be able to have the defensive integrity from your center, but you also need to have someone who can provide some offensive juice. So I don't think that's anyone in the league right now. Like who's going to be available realistically? Like it'd have to be like AD, but he's getting old, or Embiid. Like that's the type of big. Like we need a unicorn. It's hard to find them, unfortunately. I think this. I want to ask you guys like how many unicorns? Because in my opinion, I really think it's Wemby, Chet, Mobley, and maybe I'm forgetting one, but like I can't think of anyone else besides.
I mean, yeah, like like if we're limiting unicorns to like, okay, this guy has like 1% physical tools and like top 1% physical stuff and is like actually actually like putting it to use on both ends of the floor, like legitimate high level two-way player. The list doesn't go that much further than those three. Maybe there's like one or two, like Porzingis obviously got like the original unicorn title, and I think who he's been is like an isolation scorer in Boston. Obviously, that's it's bolstered by just
Right.
the talent that they have around him and everything. But in terms of like two-way play, he is incredible. Young guys though, yeah, it's really those two. You mentioned that Şengün defensive liability earlier in this pod. We kind of like Şengün's defense a little bit. I don't know if it will ever get to the point where you're like, oh, two-way player, Şengün or Mobley, but I think it could get to the point where if his offense, like if he adds a jumper and he's like just solid defensively with like a lot of really great wings around him, maybe we could be talking about just like overall impact in a similar manner. But yeah, I think
He's been great. Like, not to cut you off, but I just wanted to share this real quick. Like, I read a really interesting article where like he's guarding other teams' smalls at the second highest rate of any center in the league, and that's been such a great strategy for them because now they can use all that length flying around him, and he can come over and contest. I think he's like second, or maybe he might be first now in contest at the rim per game, and teams are shooting like pretty poorly against him in those areas too. Like I think like they're shooting below their expected average, which is not something that's ever been true for him. So yeah, I didn't mean necessarily call him a liability. Even though I'd said that, but I think it's more so like he's
Just
still not.
the weak point on that team.
Yeah, exactly. He's a weak point. Like if you draw him out, that's still not a
Mhm.
great situation for Houston, even if he is really good
Yeah.
as a team defender. And he's been like just like really good just tracking shots in general. Like, I've been super impressed with his growth.
yeah. Damn. So one thing I was gonna say, you've talked about, and offensive pop, he doesn't fit the same way, but you talked about like all the guys that you see coming up in this draft. I wanted Atlanta to get Donovan Clingan this offseason. I want, and like whether that's them like moving back because he fell to like seventh or whatever, or just like being like, we have the number one pick, we don't give a shit. Like this was a miracle that we got it. Let's just take this guy. And I definitely don't think Rizashay is like a bad pick by any means. I really like his defense, and he has, I don't know, he has like offensive. If you get into the right matchup where people will bite on his fakes, like Karl Anthony Towns, every time Rizashay fucking went up with the ball, it felt like Cat was like jumping at it, and those are situations where he can do things, and especially when you talk about like the Hawks where they're at. They can't pick up like a full project guy right now. It's cool that Rizashay is pretty close to being like a serious contributor on a good team, but I do just like look at what Clingan is in terms of like very straightforward, great rim protector, can do some switching, like just very high level defender in general, and then would be really reliable pick and roll lob threat for Trey. Was that ever something that like entered your mind? Do you like, I'm sure you're chill with Rizashay too, but like, do you wish they had done something like that? How do you feel about that stuff?
I think we would have had the trade down. And I think what I really liked about Clingan was, of course, the defense, but the passing. Like what he was doing at UConn, he was a hub. Like backdoor passes, lead passes, all types of really interesting stuff from him. And I would have loved to see it, but I do think like we've just been wing deficient for a long, long time, and I think finding a I've been thinking about this, but it's like I think finding replacement level center play is a little bit, or I think the Hawks need more than replacement level center play, and they also need, but they could sort of make do with like a solid starter at wing. So they need someone really special at center, and I don't think they were convinced that Clingan was going to be that special guy.
Yeah, I don't think
But
he's a
Reza Shea, they felt
unicorn
comfortable about the
like
floor.
you've described.
But yeah, but he's still going to be so impactful. Like puts a lid on the rim. He has great touch, but I also was kind of worried about his verticality. Like he's 7'2", but he doesn't really get off the floor. So yes, he has some insane catch radius, but like, what does that look like against some of the more vertically gifted guys in the NBA? I think they would have been a great pairing. He would have been 15 and 10, but then that would have meant like, okay, Clint Capella would have had to be gone, at least in my opinion. So it would have been really have to be some other moves that had to be made. I also didn't show DeAndre Hunter any love, but I just remember this when I said wings. But like, a career year at 27, he's actually like a positive, impactful player from really like the first time in his career over a sustained stretch, which is crazy. Outside of like a random February a couple of years ago, and he had a kid and he got married. Sometimes that's all
He
it takes.
figured his life out. Nice.
Yep.
Good for him, man.
And so he's playing extremely simple basketball. Like he could be a little neurotic with the ball. Like he would put the ball on the floor too much. He's doing too much, but he's got the highest assist percentage of his career in terms of his baskets that are being assisted. He's at like career lows and like overall like dribbles per touch. And so he's been a great play finisher. The Hawks have put him in the position to do so coming off the bench. And he's one of the biggest reasons we've closed these games out. And I think he should be in the 6-man of the year race like pretty easily. Like I think he's above 20 points per game off the bench. So he's absolutely hooping. And I think without him, like eventually he had to be this player, but we sort of viewed him as like more of the defensive guy who would have some offensive juice. But the way that he's grown into an offensive player, like that unlocks so much more for the Hawks because now they can give you two different looks. They can come in and compete. And I think the other thing is too, like we were asking Dre to guard the other team's best player. That was never his game. Like even at Virginia, he was never disruptive. He was not a heavy steal percentage or block percentage guy. He was just solid. But that solid isn't good enough in the NBA. Like you have to be all world if you're going to guard the other team's best player every night and be a great offensive player. So I think his role got simplified. And I think it's a good lesson. Like in the same way, like Aaron Gordon became an incredibly impactful player. Sometimes it's a change of scenery. Sometimes it's a change of role. So I just had to give him some flowers because I've been so impressed with him. And I think, same thing with like PJ Washington, guys like that. Like I just love seeing guys find their footing in the NBA, especially if it's with the same team. So.
Yeah, especially guys like it's one thing if like a guard with like a quirky play style doesn't figure it out, but guy who's like lengthy athletic wing who we've seen shoot the ball well before, it's like this is what literally every team needs. So if there's nowhere for you to fit, it's super frustrating. I think what you were talking about earlier about why the vibes are different with the Hawks and the way they have just generated easy looks. When you watch the Hawks, nothing seems as difficult as it was last year. I think Hunter's like the biggest beneficiary of that. Like all of the possessions that he's finishing are just like, hey, this is an open 3-point shot. You could take your time with it. You could knock it down, or you could attack the closeout. You could do some of the other stuff that you are capable of offensively. We're not desperate for any of that. You don't have to bail out like a completely cooked possession. You just have to play well within your means, and he's done it incredibly well. I agree with like the 6-man of the year point and everything else. The last thing, I guess we got two more. The one thing I asked, which we talked about already kind of, is like, so this team is fun right now. What do you think needs to happen with this Hawks team? And it doesn't necessarily need to be like a move at the deadline. This could be over the course of a few years. What needs to happen for this Hawks team to go from fun, 6-game win streak to get above 500, lots of statement wins over good teams, into seriously good team territory where we're talking about them, even like we're talking about like the Bucks or the Knicks, not like we don't have to have them in like, are they the Cavs? Are they Celtics here? Just like a serious playoff team that people respect. What changes do you or would you like to see happen?
There's been a lot of different points that Hawks fans have pointed at. It's like they want a backup point guard. They want a backup 4. They want to reevaluate the center position. I'm a big Kobe Buffkin guy. I don't think he's gotten enough run for us to be making any decisions about him. And I also think he needs more minutes next to Trey. We're sort of running him out there as a backup point guard, and he's done like an admirable job this season, but I think he needs more reps, like as like sort of attacking the advantage Trey creates for him. And I think he'd look a lot better. He's a 50, 40, 90 guy, essentially in college. And he also shot 70% at the rim with like less than 25% of his buckets at the rim being assisted. So like he has a lot of untapped scoring potential that we haven't seen yet. So I'm comfortable there. I think the backup 4 is a good point, but I don't really know who that guy would be. I think ultimately I just want to see this team finish this out as constructed unless we move on from Clint Capella. That's kind of like I would like to see that personally. But I think they could also recoup some value and then sort of free up some more minutes to see what Onyeka can do. And then maybe bring in another young guy. Like Day'Ron Sharpe would be an interesting flyer. I think he's a pretty impactful guy at Brooklyn. And then you could see like what can Onyeka hold it down for 30-plus minutes a night? Because right now they're sort of splitting time. And then we just need to see guys grow. Like Dyson, Reza Shea, and Jalen Johnson need time. They need reps. They need confidence built up in them because those are the guys that are going to eventually have to grow into the roles that are going to be played on a contender. And I think that homegrown wing talent is so valuable. Like you said, everyone's looking for him. And when you have flashes like these guys do, you have to foster it. And so I don't think bringing in anyone at their position makes any sense unless it's, obviously like a superstar. But I still don't think there's a superstar who can elevate this team considering what we'd have to give up. Like I kind of have the same philosophy about the Rockets, but I think the Rockets are a lot closer to going in. If like Devin Booker was available, by all means, I would say they should do it. But I don't think the Hawks are going to be at that point for like the next 1 to 2 years. And so, being a plucky team is fun. Kind of have no expectations. People were convinced we were going to miss the play-in, and I was trying to, I think this team is capable of winning 40 games. In the East, this is like an unserious conference. I mean, Philly, I think, is now 2 games back at the 8th seed or something ridiculous after being absolute garbage. So it's like anything could happen in the East. Hawks could finish top 6. We could finish top 4. Orlando just lost Franz. Like this, like the conference is garbage. So, honestly, I just want to see these guys continue to get reps. And then I think building sustainably is so important, especially with the new CBA, Boston having a stranglehold on the rest of the conference. And then, of course, what's percolating in the West. I think our window would be like in the next 2 to 3 years, which I'm fine with.
Okay. Pablo, I feel like I've talked too much. Like, what are you thinking right now?
Yes, I actually disagree. I think the Hawks should blow it all up for Zach LaVine and Vucevic. You mentioned that they need a half-court rim pressure. Zach LaVine brings that, and elite shooting, and then a unicorn center. Of course, Nikola Vucevic, 7-foot 3-point maestro, has existed on some top 10 defenses. And you don't. Who cares that he doesn't get a free throw? He'll go several games without getting a free throw because Trey Young gets all the free throws. You don't need that. So, he just screening, passing. So all in, and maybe get Josh Giddey while you're there too. And so I would sell out all your picks for that. Maybe.
Nice. That's the problem when we bring in a smart guy. When we bring in someone smart, we're just too busy having like smart conversations to say dumb stuff, and so we have to hit our funny quota 50 minutes in somehow.
Vucevic would actually be I don't know if there's a player I dislike like more. It's just like the dude. He's so also he fried us when we played him, but it's like he's shooting so unsustainably well from 3 right now. It's ridiculous. But we have Hawks fans like, we should get Vucevic. Like, no, we should not. He's 33.
No.
33. Like, no.
The last time he did this is when we traded for him.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster. Yeah. He had one season shooting 40% from 3 and was a replacement all-star or a center all-star in the East. And then our caveman GM sold out. Oh, speaking of, you guys, I don't know if caveman would be the right objective. You have kind of a nepotism owner going on. Like the owner's son was, or the owner's like, hey son, take over. And he's like, all right, my best friend is running things with me. And we like Landry Fields. And so but Landry Fields, there's good and bad so far, right? So how do you feel about the management, the front office structure?
Man, I'm actually been pretty impressed with Landry, but he told a story that I think he met Nick Ressler and they bonded over chicken tenders or something like that, like when they were scouting. I don't really I'm not a fan of nepotism in organizations that matter. It's different if like BlackRock or something like that. Like, they're going to control everything. But like with my team, like get that out of my organization. I'm like, that's disgusting. And I absolutely abhor it. And so, man, if you look at Nick's, they call him Nicky Ressler, like Hawks fans. You look at his LinkedIn, I don't think he's qualified, but he doesn't have like a huge consequential role, which is good. But I think the ownership in general has been very cheap. The Hawks have not paid a tax in a long time. At one point, they were going to take away the fan section, which was like an absolute uproar. And then like they ended up rebranding it, but like they weren't communicating it. So it's like a lot of shady things. I think with ownership in general, I think most NBA owners are in it for the profit. And it's like, I think business owners need to stop buying teams. We need fans like who are going to risk all their money in their bank account, like Steve Ballmer, Matt Ishmael. Like I want those guys who like are fans and are willing to mortgage their futures for the success of their team. That's what I would like to see in Atlanta. But we've had a long streak of poor ownership. But I honestly been satisfied with Landry. I like the draft picks with Kobe Buffkin. The one thing I will say is like, because we did not take a big in 23 or 24, 25 means that we have to hit on a big because Derek Lively could have been a game changer, and that would have to be a trade up.
Ooh, that
would of course,
cool.
we may have conversations about Klingon for a long time or Sar. So I think this is the most pivotal draft class that he's going to have to evaluate because we need a big. And these bigs in particular, this is not a big heavy class. Like there are a lot of guys that could be considered, but they're not polished by any means. Like I think Derek Lively was a lot more highly regarded. It took him time, of course. Like he was kind of bad to start the season, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough evaluation just because like I think the best big right now is Derek Queen, and he's more like Naz Reid. So like Nas Reed is not the type of big we need. Um, so it's tough. It's gonna be. I think this will be like a make or break in terms of like the overall plan for the Hawks, like this particular offseason. But I like the groundwork he's done. I understand the vision. Like bringing on Vit Krejci, like betting on size, versatility, secondary ball handlers. Like there's been really smart moves on the margin. We haven't seen Dominique Barlow yet play any NBA minutes outside of garbage time. But like when I was speaking to one of the reporters during a podcast over the summer, and he said like when he talked to people around the league, people were shocked that Dom Barlow got a two-way contract. They were convinced he's going to get a standard contract. So they was like one of the best two-way contracts in the NBA. We haven't seen that value pay off, but like he's in our system. I still think he has a lot of talent. So I think the marginal moves have been really good. I'm a huge fan of the Dyson trade. I love the draft picks so far. Mohamed Gay is a guy that I think, could pan out to be something. So I think I'd give him like a B right now. I think it could get a lot better during this offseason, but I honestly been pretty pleased. Like I guess nepotism, like in that particular aspect, I'm not too mad at, but
Nice. Yeah. Sometimes it works,
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay. All right. The only other thing I have here is a little Jalen Johnson glaze. That's it. All right. So I have Jalen Johnson, and then I grouped together, and we don't have to do like who's better, who would you take or whatever. But like I'm curious how you feel. Jalen Johnson kind of stands out from the group. I wrote down Scotty Barnes, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Williams. These are four guys who are all like within a year age-wise of each other, 22, 23 years old, and they're all averaging about like 22, 7, and 5 or whatever if you averaged all their stats together. Obviously, Franz without Paolo, crazy volume on his scoring. Jalen Johnson is a better rebounder than most of these guys. So I'm curious. He's been a bright spot this season, and I think as the season has gone on, he's got better as well, which has been really nice. Yeah. Just like how does he stand out to you among the crowd of like promising young forwards?
Yeah, what I like about that list is like they're all so stylistically different, and I think Franz is easily the best player there, and that's something I've been like banging the Franz drum since I watched him. Really, it was the World Cup, and then I saw him in the Olympics. I was like, yeah, he's ready. Like,
yeah.
And I looked at the numbers between him and Paolo, and they weren't always in favor of Paolo in terms of like the on-offs and stuff. So I was trying to push that propaganda.
Cook.
I think
my
Franz is
God,
pretty
dude.
cut ahead. But I think Jalen is J Dub is a guy that I think is a little bit more limited than people realize. I think he kind of relies on like being tubby sometimes. Like he's bumping guys off. Like, he doesn't really have, like he doesn't have like that's great for the playoffs. Like, that's the guy I was watching. I was watching him snake on the pick and roll, and like he's such a wide frame that like he can really bump guys off him. But I think he has to grow so much more as a playmaker and like as a decision maker. And so I think that he's producing at a higher level in some aspects than Jalen, but I think they're pretty close. And then I think Scotty is just like the quintessential do it all. Like I'll handle the rebounding, the playmaking, and the scoring. He has ridiculous like that dunk he had on Vucevic. I think it was last year where he just sort of extended his arm up like all the way up here and just brought it like he has these like moments of just like absolute like wow factors that I think sort of put him like right below Franz for me. But I think J-Dub and Jalen and like Jalen Johnson is legitimately, at least in my opinion, the best transition player in the NBA right now. Grab and go. He's such a force, whether as like the finisher or the initiator. But the issue is he gets tunnel vision, and that happened against the Lakers game. Sometimes he just wants to drive towards the rim, so he still has to grow as a decision maker as well. But I think he already adds so much value in transition as a weak side rim protector. Then it's like, okay, what can he do in the half court? And he's learning how to use his size more. So I think he'll definitely be in those combos for a long time, and I think it won't be long before he gets like fringe all-star buzz. Maybe not this year, but like seasons to come. And he already has all the tools. Like he has like the very baseline like things to be effective. Now it's just about like how can he polish his game. So I think he's firmly in that conversation for sure.
Yeah. I mean, if the injuries keep happening, maybe the All-Star is coming down the pipeline. Who knows? Scotty went out, Franz went out. It's insane. All right, Pop.
He is an incredible rim protector. How do they ever try and go like super duper small with him at the 5 as just like the sole rim protector? Do they ever try it, and does that ever work or no?
Pretty rarely. But what's interesting is he's one of the best like weak side rim protectors in the NBA. I think he's only played a fraction of his minutes at center this year. Yeah, he's played like less. less than 1% of his minutes. Like there's not even a number there. I think it was maybe like for a couple possessions. But his weak side rim protection is ridiculous. He has great timing, and I think that's what like his best defensive factor is right now. Like the teams are shooting like almost 7 percentage points worse when he's on the floor. And I can't remember the exact stat I have, but like I think he was. Oh yeah, someone had like made a graph like weak side rim protection, and then like something else was on the y-axis, and he was like all the way up here.
Hell yeah.
So yeah.
How is Dyson Daniels rim protection? Because that's also as a prospect was the strength of Rizichet, and that's somewhere he could grow along too. How good is Dyson Daniels there right now?
Yeah, I think because they use him so much on ball that he hasn't had a lot of opportunity to roam as the rim protector. He's really he's incredibly disruptive off ball. So like he's blowing up actions. What I really love that I've seen from him is like he's meeting centers quickly as a low man. Like before they catch the ball, he's already manned up. I think he did against Anthony Davis, forced a miss. And so a lot of his rim protection, even before the shot goes up, like he's already plugging gaps. Like I wish one thing I hate about being in Atlanta, like obviously love the city, love that I grew up here, but like the blackouts make it so tough to watch the full games because you have to wait 3 days. So like I have these clips in my mind where like he's plugged up 4 different holes in one possession, flying around at the rim on the perimeter, but it's like I can't put it all together because it's like I gotta wait 3 days. But yeah, I feel like I could put together 15 to 20 clips just from the last couple of games where he completely saved a defensive possession, and that's because of his activity at the rim, at the perimeter. At the numbers wise, he didn't grade out as high as I thought he would, like at least so far this season. But I do think a lot of that's more so his role where he's guarding guys on the ball, he's getting screened off, so a little bit different there. But he's been like everything as advertised, and even more honestly.
Yeah, that's another trend that the NBA is taking is like getting rim protection from other sources, and so they're definitely ahead of the curve on a lot of teams in that aspect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all I had written down. Pablo, do you have any other points with Atlanta that you want to get off your chest?
I think we covered it all.
Okay, cool.
Should they get Goga?
Oh my God! If the price is right, I mean, it's so crazy that he just like is on the bench for like weeks at a time with them. That pisses me off. I'm watching DeAndre Jordan minutes in 2024, and they're just like, Goga, we got some garbage time for you. Go fetch. And he's like, cool, thanks, guys. So yeah, that would be crazy. All right. Well, I mean, while you have the platform here, DLEE, David, is there anything that you want to plug? Anything you want to direct the audience towards as far as your work?
Yeah, for sure. So I started doing a podcast after the games with breakdown film. I bring on a fan from the team we play. So I'll bring on a Knicks fan either tonight or tomorrow. Just sort of understand like the film or numbers that define each game. I'm probably gonna drop a YouTube video sort of explaining this Hawks. I'm still kind of come up with a title. It's not corny, but like the Hawks basically reintroducing themselves because like this is a different, like you guys have emphasized this entire episode. This is a different Hawks team that you may be familiar with. So probably look out for that. And then like I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube, all under DLEE4THREE. And again, thank y'all so much for the opportunity. I love to talk Hawks, but I love to talk basketball in general. So thank y'all so much.
Yeah. This was great. I really liked this episode. You're a fun conversationalist as far as this stuff goes. You really know what you're talking about. Okay, I will plug all his stuff in the description below. If you guys want to go, please go check it out. Support him. And other than that, we will see you guys in 2 or 3 days. Pau Gasol, take it away.
Lay down